The letter trembled in Tabitha Monroe's weary hands as the stagecoach rumbled over another rut in the dusty road. April 1875, the date on her marriage agreement felt both impossibly distant and terrifyingly immediate. She tucked a loose strand of auburn hair back into her fraying bonnet and stared out at the endless Nebraska plains stretching toward a horizon that promised nothing but uncertainty. "Nearly there, miss," the driver called down. "North Platte's just beyond that ridge." Tabitha folded the wrinkled paper with her prospective husband's details: Keith Calloway, cattle rancher, age 31, and tucked it into the small pocket of her only decent dress. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, mended so many times that the original pattern had almost disappeared beneath her careful stitches. The past 3 days of travel had been grueling, but they were nothing compared to the desperate months in Philadelphia after her parents' deaths. The influenza had taken them within days of each other, leaving Tabitha alone with mounting debts and no prospects. At 23, she had pawned what little she could and answered Mr. Calloway's advertisement in the matrimonial news with trembling hope. The stagecoach crested the final hill, revealing North Platte spread below like a collection of wooden blocks scattered across the prairie. The town hugged the meeting point of the North and South Platte rivers, with the railroad cutting through its center like a steel lifeline to the rest of the country. "First time out west?" asked the elderly woman seated across from her, the only other passenger remaining. Tabitha nodded, trying to hide her apprehension. "Yes, madam, mail-order bride." The woman's gaze wasn't unkind, merely curious as it swept over Tabitha's threadbare traveling dress and single carpetbag. "Yes." Tabitha lifted her chin slightly. "I'm to marry Mr. Keith Calloway." The woman's eyebrows rose. "The Calloway Ranch? Well now." She gave a small nod of approval. "You've landed on your feet there, girl. Good family, decent land, though they've had their share of troubles since old man Calloway passed." The coach lurched to a stop on North Platte's Main Street, interrupting further conversation. Tabitha gathered her meager belongings and stepped down into the dusty thoroughfare, her legs stiff from the journey. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and the air smelled of dust, horses, and wood smoke. She stood uncertainly beside her small carpetbag, scanning the street for the man whose description she'd memorized: tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a scar along his right jaw. "Miss Monroe." Tabitha turned to find a young boy of perhaps 12 standing behind her, hat in hand. "Yes." "Mr. Calloway sent me to fetch you. He's finishing up some business at the Mercantile." The boy pointed down the street. "I'm Tommy. I work at the livery. Mr. Calloway said to bring you to Widow Parker's boarding house to freshen up. He'll call on you for supper." Relief washed through her. "Thank you, Tommy." The boy grabbed her carpetbag before she could protest and set off at a brisk pace. Tabitha followed, acutely aware of curious gazes tracking her progress down the street. North Platte wasn't large, perhaps 40 buildings clustered around the main thoroughfare, with smaller dwellings scattered around the outskirts. The railroad depot dominated one end of town, while saloons and shops lined the street. "That's Mrs. Parker's place," Tommy said, pointing to a white 2-story house with a small porch. "Best cook in the county." As they approached the boarding house, Tabitha noticed 2 well-dressed women on the porch. They fell silent as she drew near, their eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "Thank you, Tommy," she said, reaching for her bag. The boy handed it over with a nod. "Mr. Calloway said he'd be by at 6 o'clock sharp." As Tommy trotted away, Tabitha turned toward the steps, summoning what dignity she could. "Good afternoon," she offered to the women. The older of the two, A blonde woman in her 40s wearing an expensive blue dress looked Tabitha up and down. "You must be Keith Calloway's mail-order bride." "Yes, madam, Tabitha Monroe." She extended her hand, which the woman ignored. "I'm Margaret Harrington. This is my daughter, Viola." She gestured to the younger woman, who regarded Tabitha with undisguised disdain. "A pleasure to meet you both," Tabitha said, lowering her hand. Margaret's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Keith certainly chose. Economically. Though I suppose beggars can't be choosers, what with the state of the ranch these days." Heat flooded Tabitha's cheeks. "If you'll excuse me, I should get settled before Mr. Calloway arrives." "Of course." Margaret stepped aside. "Those patches on your sleeve are quite skillfully done." "Were you a seamstress back east?" "I worked in a millinery shop," Tabitha replied stiffly. "How quaint." Viola finally spoke, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Perhaps you can make hats for the ranch hands' wives. They wouldn't notice the quality difference." Tabitha pushed past them into the boarding house, blinking back the sting of tears. Mrs. Parker, a plump woman with kind eyes, greeted her in the front parlor. "You must be Miss Monroe. I've prepared a room upstairs for you. There's fresh water for washing, and I'll have a hot meal ready when Mr. Calloway comes." Her warm smile was a balm after the women on the porch. "Don't mind the Harringtons. They're just sore because Margaret set her cap for Keith after his father died, but he wouldn't have her." "Thank you, Mrs. Parker." Tabitha followed the older woman upstairs to a small but clean room with a single bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. "Rest up, dear. You look worn to the bone." Alone at last, Tabitha sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of doubt. She'd spent her last dollars on the journey west, burning her bridges behind her. If Keith Calloway took one look at her and changed his mind, she'd be destitute in a strange town. She unpacked her few belongings, carefully laying out her second dress nearly as worn as the one she wore. From the bottom of her bag, she removed a small daguerreotype of her parents, the only keepsake she hadn't been forced to sell. Her mother's Bible lay beside it, along with a handkerchief embroidered by her grandmother. After washing her face and hands, Tabitha changed into her other dress and rebraided her hair, pinning it neatly at the nape of her neck. She had just finished when a knock came at the door. "Miss Monroe, Mr. Calloway's here," Mrs. Parker called. Tabitha took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. Mrs. Parker led her downstairs to the parlor, where a man stood with his back to the door, staring out the window. He turned as she entered, and Tabitha's breath caught. Keith Calloway was taller than she'd imagined, his shoulders broad beneath a clean white shirt. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and the scar along his jaw was more prominent than she'd expected. His eyes, a deep blue that reminded her of the ocean she'd left behind, widened slightly as he took her in. "Miss Monroe." His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Mr. Calloway." She managed a small curtsy, suddenly acutely aware of her mended dress and worn boots. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." His gaze was direct but not unkind. It was educational. She attempted a smile. "I've never been west of the Mississippi before." He nodded, seeming unsure of what to say next. "I've arranged for us to dine at the hotel restaurant. It's the best meal in town, aside from Mrs. Parker's cooking." "That sounds lovely, thank you." As they stepped onto the porch, Tabitha noticed the Harrington women still lingering nearby, their eyes narrowing at the sight of Keith. "Keith, darling," Margaret called. "We were just saying how charitable you are. Not many men would send for a bride in such." She glanced at Tabitha's dress, reduced circumstances. Keith's jaw tightened. "Margaret, Viola." His acknowledgement was curt. "If you'll excuse us, of course." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. We understand completely. The ranch hasn't been profitable for some time. You can't afford to be particular." Tabitha felt Keith's hand come to rest lightly at the small of her back as he guided her past the women. "Pay them no mind," he murmured, once they were out of earshot. "Margaret's been trying to sink her claws into the ranch since my father died." The hotel dining room was nearly empty when they arrived. Keith pulled out Tabitha's chair before seating himself across from her. In the lamplight, she could see the fatigue lines around his eyes and the weathered tan of his skin. "I suppose we should become acquainted," he said after they'd ordered. "Your letters were informative but necessarily brief, as were yours." Tabitha smoothed her napkin across her lap. "Though I appreciate your honesty about the ranch's difficulties." Keith's expression darkened momentarily. "No sense starting with deception. The drought last year hit us hard and rustlers took nearly a quarter of my herd, but we're recovering. This year's calving was good and the new well is producing." "I'm glad to hear it." Tabitha hesitated. "Mr. Calloway, I should be honest as well. As you may have noticed, I come with very little. After my parents died, the debts," she swallowed. "Everything had to be sold. These clothes and what's in my bag are all I have." Keith studied her for a long moment. "Miss Monroe, Tabitha, please." "Tabitha." He seemed to test the name. "I didn't send for a bride because I was looking for money or possessions. I need a partner, someone willing to work alongside me to build something lasting. The ranch is isolated, the work is hard, and the comforts are few. But it's good land, and it could be a good life." Before she could respond, their food arrived: thick steaks with potatoes and fresh bread. Tabitha realized how hungry she was, having eaten little on the journey. "Please eat," Keith encouraged, noticing her hesitation. "Mrs. Davis makes the best steaks in Nebraska territory." The meal was indeed delicious, and as they ate, Keith told her about the ranch 15 miles outside town, with a main house, bunkhouse for the hands, barn, and corral. He had 8 men working for him, though he needed more. "And what about family?" Tabitha ventured. "You mentioned your father passed away. 2 years ago. My mother died when I was 12. No siblings. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles away, the Hendersons, good people. Sarah Henderson will be glad to have another woman nearby." Tabitha nodded, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The isolation he described was far more extreme than she'd imagined. "And the town? Do you come in often?" "Every few weeks for supplies." Keith's gaze was steady. "Tabitha, it's not too late to change your mind. I can arrange passage back east if this isn't what you expected." The offer surprised her. "With what money, Mr. Calloway? I spent everything I had to get here. That's my concern, not yours." She straightened her spine. "I don't require charity, Mr. Calloway. I came west to start anew, and that's what I intend to do." She met his gaze directly. "Unless you've changed your mind about our arrangement." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "No, I haven't changed my mind." As they finished their meal, Tabitha became aware of whispers from nearby tables as more diners arrived. More than once, she caught people staring at her dress, at the careful mending along the seams. Keith seemed to notice her discomfort. "We should discuss the wedding," he said, keeping his voice low. "The Reverend can perform the ceremony tomorrow if that suits you, or we can wait if you prefer." "Tomorrow is fine," Tabitha said quickly. One more day of scrutiny in town held no appeal. They walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, the spring air cooling rapidly. Keith kept a respectable distance, though Tabitha was acutely aware of his presence beside her. At the boarding house steps, he stopped. "I'll come for you at 10 tomorrow morning. The ceremony will be small, just us, the Reverend, and perhaps a witness or two." Tabitha nodded, uncertainty flooding her again. This man was still a stranger, yet tomorrow she would be his wife. "Mr. Calloway, Keith." She tested his name. "I want you to know that I intend to be a good wife. I can cook, so keep accounts, and I'm not afraid of hard work." His expression softened slightly. "I believe you." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This was my mother's, I thought. Well, every bride should have something." Tabitha opened the box with trembling fingers to find a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Until tomorrow, then." He tipped his hat and turned to go. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching his tall figure disappear into the deepening twilight. Sleep proved elusive that night. Tabitha lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house and the occasional shout or piano notes drifting from the saloon down the street. By dawn, she had resigned herself to her decision. Whatever hardships lay ahead, they couldn't be worse than what she'd left behind. She dressed carefully in her best dress, still shabby despite her efforts to clean and press it, and pinned her mother's cameo at her throat. When Mrs. Parker knocked on her door, she was ready. "There's a package for you, dear," the older woman said, handing her a large paper-wrapped parcel. "Delivered early this morning." Puzzled, Tabitha unwrapped it to find a beautiful dress of deep blue calico, simple but well made, with a matching bonnet. A note was pinned to the collar. "A new beginning deserves new attire. KC." Tears pricked her eyes at the unexpected kindness. The dress fit well enough, slightly loose in the waist, where hardship had whittled her frame, but the quality of the fabric and stitching was far superior to anything she'd owned in years. When Keith arrived, he paused in the doorway of the parlor, his gaze traveling slowly over her new appearance. "The color suits you," he said simply. "Thank you. It was incredibly thoughtful." He offered his arm, and they walked to the small white church at the end of town. The reverend, a portly man with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. Mrs. Parker had come along as witness, along with an older man Keith introduced as Dr. Thompson, a family friend. The ceremony was brief but dignified. Tabitha's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, but Keith's deep voice remained steady. When he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, his calloused hand was gentle against hers. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Keith hesitated, then leaned down to press a chaste kiss to Tabitha's lips. It was brief, but sent an unexpected warmth through her body. There was a small celebration afterward at the hotel, a simple luncheon with cake provided by Mrs. Parker. Tabitha noticed several townspeople watching through the windows, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Congratulations, Mrs. Calloway." The voice belonged to Margaret Harrington, who had apparently invited herself to the gathering. Her smile was brittle as she examined Tabitha's new dress. "How fortunate that Keith could afford to dress you properly for the occasion." Before Tabitha could respond, Keith's hand settled at her waist. "My wife doesn't need fine clothes to be beautiful, Margaret, but she deserves them nonetheless." Margaret's smile faltered. "Well, I hope you'll both be very happy on that struggling ranch of yours." As she stalked away, Keith bent to whisper in Tabitha's ear. "Ready to leave? It's a long ride home. Home." The words sent a flutter of both anxiety and hope through her chest. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Keith had brought a wagon rather than riding horseback, for which Tabitha was grateful. Her few belongings were loaded quickly, along with supplies Keith had purchased in town. She said goodbye to Mrs. Parker, promising to visit when they next came to town. As the wagon rolled out of North Platte, Tabitha watched the buildings recede, replaced by the vast openness of the Nebraska prairie. Spring had painted the landscape in tentative greens, with wildflowers beginning to dot the rolling hills. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking the silence between them. Keith glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. Most Easterners find it empty. Not empty, just different. There's a wildness to it, he nodded, seeming pleased by her response. The ranch is in a small valley near the river. Good water, good grass. My father chose well. As the wagon rocked along the rutted trail, Keith told her about his childhood on the ranch, about the cattle operation, about his hopes for expanding if they could survive another year or two of building back the herd. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "Your letters mentioned your parents passing, but little else." Tabitha hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "My father was a bookkeeper for a shipping company. We lived comfortably enough until the Panic of '73. The company failed and he couldn't find steady work after. He took what jobs he could, but the strain." She swallowed hard. "When influenza came through Philadelphia last winter, neither of them had the strength to fight it." "I'm sorry." Keith's voice was quiet. "The creditors took almost everything. I had work at the millinery, but the wages weren't enough to keep up with the debts." She smoothed her new dress over her knees. "When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like Providence." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the landscape gradually changing as they approached the river. The afternoon was waning when Keith pointed toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a gentle valley. "There it is. Calloway Ranch." Tabitha leaned forward, taking in the sight of her new home. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a two-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, with corrals and a bunkhouse visible beyond. In the distance, cattle grazed on the greening prairie. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to greet them, followed by a middle-aged man with a pronounced limp. "That's Hank, my foreman," Keith explained. "Been with the family since before I was born." Hank waited by the barn as Keith pulled the wagon to a stop. "Welcome back, boss, madam." He tipped his hat to Tabitha. "Everything's quiet. Boys are out checking the north pasture fences." "Hank, this is my wife, Tabitha." The words sounded strange to her ears. "Tabitha, Hank Morrison. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Calloway." Hank's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. "We're right glad to have a woman's touch around here again." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I hope I can live up to expectations." Keith helped her down from the wagon, his hand strong at her waist. "I'll show you the house while Hank unloads the supplies." The main house was solid and well built, if somewhat neglected. The front room held a stone fireplace, a worn but comfortable-looking sofa, and several chairs. A dining table with 8 chairs dominated one end of the room, while bookshelves lined another wall. "My father liked to read," Keith explained, following her gaze to the surprisingly extensive collection. "Mother taught school before they married." The kitchen was large and functional, with a massive iron stove, a pump at the sink, and ample workspace. A pantry held stores of flour, sugar, coffee, and preserved goods. "Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, has been sending food over with the hands," Keith said, "but it'll be your domain now if you're comfortable with that." "Of course." Tabitha ran her hand along the worn wooden countertop, already planning how she would organize things. Upstairs, Keith showed her 2 bedrooms, one clearly his, with a large bed and simple furnishings, and another that had been closed up. "My parents' room," he said, his voice tight. "I haven't." "That is, I thought you might want." He stopped, seeming uncharacteristically flustered. Tabitha realized he was offering her a choice, her own room or his. The implications made her cheeks warm. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we could use your room. It seems practical." They were married, after all, even if they were still strangers. Relief and something else flickered across Keith's face. "Yes, practical." He cleared his throat. "I had the men bring up a washstand and chest of drawers for your things. There's space in the wardrobe for your clothes. Thank you. Tabitha hesitated. Keith, I want to be clear. I understand what marriage entails and I don't expect special consideration. We agreed to a partnership and I intend to honor that in all ways. His eyes darkened slightly. I appreciate your directness, but I don't expect. That is, we can take time to become acquainted before. He ran a hand through his hair. Damn it, I'm making a mess of this. A small laugh escaped her. Perhaps we can simply agree to be honest with each other. The rest will sort itself out in time. He nodded, seeming relieved. I'd like that. A knock at the door interrupted them. Hank called up the stairs. Boss, your trunks are in and Mrs. Henderson sent over supper. Said she figured the new missus might not want to cook her first night. The next few hours passed in a blur as Tabitha settled in. Sarah Henderson had indeed sent a feast: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie. Keith introduced Tabitha to the ranch hands as they returned from their work, 7 men of varying ages who regarded her with shy curiosity. By the time they retired for the night, Tabitha was exhausted. Keith had thoughtfully left the room while she changed into her nightgown and robe, returning only after she called that she was decent. He paused in the doorway, his gaze moving over her before he quickly looked away. I'll change in the washroom, he said, gathering his own nightclothes. When he returned, Tabitha was already in bed, the covers pulled to her chin. Keith blew out the lamp and slipped in beside her, careful to maintain space between them. Good night, Tabitha, he said softly. Good night, Keith. She lay rigid in the darkness, intensely aware of his presence beside her. Eventually, his breathing deepened, and she allowed herself to relax. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt his hand reach across the space between them to gently cover hers. Dawn broke early on the ranch, rousing Tabitha from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. Keith was already gone, his side of the bed cold. She dressed quickly in her old dress now designated for everyday wear and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but coffee bubbled on the stove. Through the window, she could see activity around the barn and corral. Taking a deep breath, she set about making breakfast, finding eggs, bacon, and the remains of yesterday's bread. By the time the men came in, drawn by the smell of cooking, she had a hearty meal laid out on the table. Keith entered last, his eyes finding hers immediately. You didn't have to cook for everyone, he said quietly as the men took their seats. I wanted to. Tabitha poured him coffee. I'm your wife, they're your men, this is what I'm here for. Something like pride flickered in his eyes. Thank you. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm as Tabitha learned the workings of the ranch. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the long-neglected house, and afternoons tending to the small kitchen garden that had gone wild in the absence of a woman's care. She took over the mending of the men's clothing, cooked hearty meals, and slowly began to feel useful. Keith was often gone from sunup to sundown, working with the cattle or repairing fences and outbuildings. But he made a point to spend evenings with her, sitting on the porch or by the fire, telling her about his day and asking about hers. Their nights remained chaste, though the space between them in the bed gradually diminished. Sometimes she would wake to find his arm draped over her waist, his face buried in her hair. These moments sent a strange longing through her, but she didn't know how to bridge the final gap between them. 3 weeks after her arrival, Sarah Henderson came to visit, bringing seedlings for the garden and welcome female companionship. The place looks transformed already, Sarah said, accepting a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. Keith was living like a bachelor with his father gone, men everywhere and not a curtain or tablecloth in sight. Tabitha laughed, glancing at the simple curtains she'd made from spare fabric, and the tablecloth she'd embroidered in the evenings. It needed a woman's touch, that's certain. "And how are you settling in?" "Really?" Sarah's kind eyes held genuine concern. "Better than I expected. Everyone's been welcoming." Tabitha hesitated. "Keith is. He's a good man." "One of the best," Sarah agreed. "His father was hard on him, expected too much too young. But Keith has a gentle heart under that stoic exterior." She studied Tabitha. "He's different since you came. Smiles more." The observation warmed Tabitha, though she wasn't sure what to make of it. "We're still getting to know each other." Sarah patted her hand. "That's how it should be. Martin and I had an arranged marriage too, you know. My father was friends with his. I barely knew Martin when we wed, but 30 years later, I can't imagine life without him." The conversation gave Tabitha hope. That evening, when Keith returned from checking cattle in the north pasture, she had prepared his favorite meal, beef stew with dumplings, a recipe Sarah had shared. "This is delicious," he said, helping himself to a second serving. "You've been talking to Sarah." Tabitha smiled. "She's been very helpful. She invited us for Sunday dinner next week." Keith nodded, looking pleased. "The Hendersons are good neighbors. Martin helped me enormously after Father died." After supper, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. The spring evening was mild, with fireflies beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. "I never thought I could love a place so different from where I grew up," Tabitha said softly. "But there's something about this land that gets under your skin." Keith's gaze was warm when she turned to him. "That's exactly how I feel. Even when it's harsh drought or blizzard or whatever else nature throws at us, I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Keith," Tabitha gathered her courage, "are you happy with our arrangement, with me being here?" His hand found hers on the porch rail. "Happier than I expected to be," he admitted. "You've brought life back to this place, Tabitha. And to me." Their faces were close now, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. Unlike the brief peck at their wedding, this kiss lingered, his lips gentle against hers. When he finally drew back, Tabitha felt breathless. "I've wanted to do that for days," he confessed. "I've wanted you to," she whispered. That night, when they retired to bed, the space between them disappeared entirely. The following weeks brought a deepening of their connection as spring gave way to summer. Tabitha's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for the table. She learned to ride, accompanying Keith on shorter trips around the property. The physical side of their marriage blossomed as well, their initial awkwardness replaced by genuine passion and tenderness. In early June, Keith announced that they needed to make a trip to North Platte for supplies. "I've been putting it off," he admitted over breakfast, "but we're running low on essentials, and there are some things for the ranch I can only get in town." Tabitha nodded, trying to hide her apprehension. She hadn't returned to town since their wedding day, and the memory of Margaret Harrington's cruel comments still stung. "When would we go?" "Tomorrow, if that suits you. We'll stay overnight at the hotel, make it a proper outing." The prospect of a night at the hotel brightened her mood somewhat. "That sounds lovely." They set out early the next morning in the wagon, the journey filled with easy conversation. Tabitha had sewn herself a new dress from fabric ordered through the general store's catalog, and while it was simple, it was well made and becoming. North Platte appeared much as she remembered, though summer had brought more activity to the streets. Keith pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store. "I need to see about some equipment," he said. "Would you like to come with me, or would you prefer to look at fabrics and such?" "I'll stay here," Tabitha decided. "Mrs. Wilson wrote that she has new patterns from back east." Keith nodded, helping her down from the wagon. "I'll meet you here in an hour or so." Inside the store, Tabitha was greeted warmly by Mrs. Wilson, the shopkeeper's wife. "Mrs. Calloway, how wonderful to see you. How are you finding ranch life?" "It suits me better than I expected," Tabitha admitted, examining a bolt of calico. "The garden is coming along nicely. I hear Keith's place is looking right homey with you there." Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice. "Between us, that ranch needed a woman's touch, something fierce, after old Mr. Calloway passed." As they chatted, the bell over the door jingled, and Tabitha turned to see Margaret and Viola Harrington enter. Their fine dresses, clearly ordered from Chicago or even New York, made Tabitha's homemade garments seem painfully plain in comparison. "Mrs. Calloway," Margaret's voice dripped with false sweetness. "What a surprise to see you in town. Keith finally let you out of that ramshackle ranch." Tabitha straightened her spine. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington, Miss Harrington. The ranch is far from ramshackle, I assure you. Keith has made remarkable improvements." "Has he?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I heard they lost another dozen head to rustlers last week." Hardly the mark of successful ranching. The news was a surprise to Tabitha. Keith had mentioned no such loss. "I think you're mistaken." "Oh, perhaps your husband doesn't share the ranch's troubles with you." Margaret's smile was venomous, "though I suppose that's understandable. What would a penniless Eastern girl know about cattle ranching?" "Mother," Viola interjected, sounding bored, "we should select those ribbons and go. I'm sure Mrs. Calloway has much to do. Patching clothes, perhaps." Her gaze flickered meaningfully to the slight wear at Tabitha's cuff. Tabitha felt heat rise in her cheeks, but refused to be cowed. "Actually, I'm selecting fabric for new curtains in our parlor. Keith and I are having the Hendersons and Dr. Thompson over for dinner next week." The mention of the Hendersons, one of the area's most respected families, caused Margaret's smile to falter slightly. "How domestic," she sniffed. "Well, we shouldn't keep you. Come, Viola." As they moved to another part of the store, Mrs. Wilson clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Don't you mind them, Mrs. Calloway. Margaret's been bitter since Keith chose you instead of Viola. Everyone knows she's been trying to get her hooks into the Calloway land for years." Tabitha selected her fabrics with less enthusiasm than before, the encounter having dampened her spirits. When she rejoined Keith outside, he immediately noticed her change in mood. "What happened?" he asked as they walked toward the hotel. "I ran into Margaret and Viola Harrington," Tabitha admitted. "They mentioned something about rustlers taking more cattle last week." Keith's expression darkened. "Damn gossips. We lost 3 head, not a dozen, and I didn't mention it because we tracked the thieves and recovered 2 of them." "You could have told me," he sighed. "You're right. I didn't want to worry you with every small problem, Keith." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "I'm your wife, your partner. I can't be either if you shield me from difficulties." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right, I'm sorry." They continued to the hotel, where Keith had reserved the best room. After freshening up, they went down to dinner in the hotel restaurant. Tabitha was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them, but Keith seemed oblivious, his attention focused entirely on her. "You look beautiful tonight," he said as they waited for their meal. "That color brings out the gold in your eyes." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you. I have something for you." Keith reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I ordered it from Denver after we were married. It just arrived." Curious, Tabitha opened the pouch and gasped. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Oh, Keith, it's exquisite. Open it," he urged. Inside the locket was a small portrait of her parents, clearly painted from the daguerreotype she kept by their bed. "How did you?" "I sent the daguerreotype to a painter in Denver. Mrs. Henderson helped me slip it out and back without you noticing." His expression was uncertain. Do you like it? Tears blurred her vision. It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. Keith's relief was evident as he helped her fasten the necklace. I wanted you to have something to remember them by, something you could keep with you always. The gesture touched her deeply, revealing a sensitivity she hadn't fully appreciated before. As they ate their meal, Tabitha found herself studying her husband with new eyes. The stern, reserved man she'd first met had gradually revealed a gentle heart and surprising thoughtfulness. After dinner, they walked along the town's main street, stopping to watch a group of musicians playing outside the more respectable saloon. Keith's arm was warm around her waist as they listened to the lively fiddle music. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "Here, in the street." His smile was boyish. Why not? Before she could protest further, he had swept her into a waltz right there on the boardwalk. A few passers-by stopped to watch, some smiling at the unexpected display. "Keith Calloway," she laughed, breathless as he spun her. "I never took you for a dancer. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around like a buffalo at social gatherings." As the music ended, he pulled her close, heedless of the onlookers, and kissed her soundly. Tabitha heard a few whoops and claps from the musicians. "Let's go back to the hotel," Keith murmured against her ear. Their room at the hotel was far more luxurious than their bedroom at the ranch. With a large feather bed and privacy they rarely enjoyed, with ranch hands always nearby. Keith locked the door behind them and turned to her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Have I told you today that I'm the luckiest man in Nebraska territory?" he asked, crossing to where she stood. "I believe that's my line," Tabitha said softly. "3 months ago I had nothing. Now I have a home, purpose, and—" She hesitated. "And?" Keith prompted, his hands coming to rest at her waist. "And a husband I'm falling in love with," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could reconsider them. Keith's expression softened. "Tabitha!" He cupped her face in his hands. "I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, looking so brave despite everything." His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with growing passion. Later, as they lay tangled in the hotel sheets, Tabitha rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never expected this," she confessed. "When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, maybe companionship. I never imagined love." Keith's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Yes," he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I never thought I'd find anyone who could love this life the way I do. The land, the work, it's not easy, but it's worth it." Tabitha propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I feel more alive here than I ever did in Philadelphia." The night was perfect, a memory Tabitha knew she would treasure, but their return to the ranch the next day brought unexpected trouble. As they approached the ranch, they saw Hank riding hard toward them, his expression grim. "Boss," he called, reining his horse alongside the wagon. "We've got problems, big ones." Keith's posture immediately tensed. "What happened?" "Rustlers hit the north pasture last night. Took at least 30 head. The boys tracked them as far as the river but lost the trail." Tabitha felt Keith go rigid beside her. 30 head, that's not small-time thieves." "No, sir. This was organized, and there's more. They left this nailed to the fence post." Hank handed over a dirty piece of paper. Keith read it, his face darkening. "Get back to the ranch. Tell the men to arm up and keep watch in pairs tonight. I want someone on the ridge with a spyglass." "What is it?" Tabitha asked as Hank rode ahead. Keith handed her the note. In crude letters it read, "Sell now or lose it all." "What does it mean?" "It means someone wants our land badly enough to steal our livelihood." Keith snapped the reins, urging the horses faster. "And I have a damn good idea who." "The Harringtons?" Tabitha asked, remembering Margaret's vicious smile. Margaret's been trying to buy up land around North Platte for years. Word is the railroad's planning a major depot expansion. Land values will soar. Keith's jaw was tight. But I never thought she'd resort to this. At the ranch, chaos reigned. The hands were agitated, checking weapons and arguing about the best course of action. Keith took control immediately, issuing clear orders and restoring calm. "We can't prove it was Harrington," he told Tabitha later that night as they sat in the kitchen. "But I'd stake my life on it. She's hired guns before to intimidate smaller ranchers. Surely the Sheriff Morris, is Margaret's cousin." Keith ran a hand through his hair. "And without proof, we have nothing." That night, Keith didn't come to bed. He joined the men keeping watch, leaving Tabitha alone in their room, worry gnawing at her. The loss of 30 cattle was a significant blow to their rebuilding efforts. The next morning, Keith announced he was riding to the Henderson ranch to discuss the situation with Martin. "Stay close to the house today," he told Tabitha. "Hank will be nearby if you need anything." After Keith left, Tabitha tried to occupy herself with household tasks, but worry made concentration difficult. By mid-afternoon, she was restless enough to venture to the kitchen garden, needing fresh air and something productive to do. She was pulling weeds from around the tomato plants when hoofbeats made her look up. 3 riders approached from the direction of town, not Keith or any of the ranch hands. Tabitha straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as the men drew closer. Their appearance was rough, with unkempt beards and dusty clothes. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his nose, reined his horse to a stop near the garden. "Afternoon, madam," he called. "This the Calloway spread." Something about his tone set alarm bells ringing in Tabitha's mind. "It is. My husband isn't here at present. Perhaps you could come back tomorrow." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That won't be necessary. We're just delivering a message." Tabitha took a step back. "I'll be happy to give it to him." "The message isn't for him, madam. It's for you." The man dismounted, his companions following suit. "Mrs. Harrington wants you to understand something. Your husband's a stubborn man, won't sell what's rightfully his. But men like that sometimes reconsider when their wives are upset." Tabitha's heart pounded as she glanced toward the barn, hoping Hank or one of the other hands would appear. But the men had been sent to check the western boundary after reports of a broken fence. "I think you should leave," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The scarred man laughed. "We will. Right after we deliver our message." He took a step toward her, and Tabitha backed away, her hand closing around the garden trowel beside her. As the man lunged forward, she swung the trowel with all her strength, catching him across the face. He howled in pain, blood streaming from a gash on his cheek. "You little bitch!" He grabbed for her, but Tabitha darted away, racing toward the house. She was halfway there when one of the other men caught her, his arm locking around her waist. Tabitha screamed, fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. "Shut her up," the scarred man growled, pressing a bandana to his bleeding face. The third man raised his hand to strike her, but before the blow could land, a gunshot cracked through the air. The man jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. "Let her go." Keith's voice was deadly calm. "Or the next one goes between your eyes." He stood at the edge of the yard, rifle raised, with Martin Henderson and 2 of his hands beside him, similarly armed. The man holding Tabitha immediately released her, raising his hands. "We were just talking, mister. No harm done." "Talking." Keith's eyes narrowed as Tabitha ran to him. "With 3 men against 1 woman." His gaze shifted to the scarred man, recognition dawning. "Tucker, Margaret must be paying well if she got you out of that Denver saloon." The scarred man spat. "Don't know what you're talking about, Calloway." Martin Henderson stepped forward. Sheriff's riding in from North Platte tomorrow. Plenty of time for you boys to get acquainted with our root cellar till then." With the rustlers securely locked in the Calloway's root cellar and guarded by Henderson's men, Keith examined the cut on Tabitha's arm where she'd been grabbed. "It's nothing," she insisted as he gently cleaned the wound. "It's not nothing." Keith's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "They could have killed you, but they didn't." Tabitha touched his face, forcing him to look at her. "I'm all right, Keith." "And now we have proof of Margaret's involvement." Keith's expression was grim. "Tucker will never testify against her. She's too powerful." "Maybe not, but his presence here after the rustling and the note, it's circumstantial, but it's something." Martin Henderson joined them in the kitchen. "Keith, we need to talk strategy. Tucker's well known as Margaret's hired muscle. Between that and the cattle rustling, we might have enough to pressure Sheriff Morris into action." As the men discussed options, Tabitha prepared coffee, her hands still shaking slightly. The attack had left her shaken but also strangely resolute. This was her home, her life with Keith, and she wouldn't be intimidated away from it. The next morning, Sheriff Morris arrived with 2 deputies. His initial skepticism faded somewhat when he saw Tucker among the captives. "This doesn't prove Mrs. Harrington's involvement," he insisted, but with less conviction than before. "Maybe not," Keith agreed. "But I'm riding into town to file formal charges of trespassing, attempted assault, and cattle rustling, and I'm taking these 3 with me." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Now, Calloway, and," Keith continued, "I'll be wiring the territorial marshal about investigating corruption in local law enforcement." That threat achieved what evidence couldn't. By evening, Tucker and his companions were safely ensconced in the North Platte jail, and Sheriff Morris was suddenly very interested in investigating the cattle rustling. The following week brought more developments. 3 of the stolen cattle were discovered in a ravine on Harrington land, creating a scandal that rocked the small community. Margaret vehemently denied any involvement, but the damage to her reputation was done. When the news reached the railroad executives considering the depot expansion, they withdrew their interest in her property deals. By mid-July, the immediate danger had passed. Tucker and his men were awaiting trial, and Margaret Harrington had retreated to Denver, taking Viola with her. The lost cattle were a financial setback, but Keith was confident they'd recover. "The summer graze is good," he told Tabitha as they walked along the river one evening, "and the new calves are strong. We'll be all right. I know we will." Tabitha squeezed his hand. "Keith, there's something I need to tell you." He stopped, turning to face her. "What is it?" Tabitha took a deep breath. I'm fairly certain, we're going to have a baby." Keith stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he let out a whoop that echoed across the valley, swept her into his arms, and spun her around. "Careful," she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "I'm in a delicate condition, remember." He set her down immediately, his hands gentle at her waist. "When?" "How long have you known?" "Early spring, I think. The baby should come in late winter." She bit her lip. "Are you truly happy about it? I know the timing isn't ideal with the ranch still recovering." Keith silenced her with a kiss. "Tabitha Calloway, you are the most precious thing in my life. And now you're giving me a child. There's no greater gift." His joy was infectious, and any lingering doubts Tabitha had harbored melted away. That night, as they lay in bed, Keith's hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter," he murmured. "Though a daughter with your eyes would be something special." "I was thinking a son with your strength," Tabitha countered, smiling in the darkness. "Either way, our child will have what I didn't, 2 parents who love each other." The words warmed her heart. "Keith, remember when we first met, and Margaret made those comments about my poverty. I try not to remember anything Margaret Harrington says." Tabitha laughed softly. "Fair enough. But it made me feel so small, so worthless, as if all I had to offer was what I owned, which was nothing." Keith propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Tabitha, from the moment I saw you standing so bravely by that stagecoach, I knew you had something far more valuable than money or possessions. You had courage, determination, and a heart big enough to take a chance on a stranger and a hard life." He traced the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You are my treasure. The money, the ranch, the cattle, they're just things. But you're everything." Tears pricked her eyes at the tenderness in his voice. "I love you, Keith Calloway. And I love you, Tabitha Calloway, now and always." As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch prospered under their combined care. Keith expanded the cattle operation, while Tabitha transformed the house into a true home. They hosted dinners for neighboring ranchers, establishing themselves as a respected family in the community. With the prospect of a child on the way, Keith undertook renovations to the unused bedroom, converting it into a nursery. Tabitha sewed tiny garments in the evenings while Keith read aloud from his father's books, their voices filling the once silent house with warmth and laughter. Word reached them in October that Margaret Harrington had sold her North Platte property and relocated permanently to Denver. The news brought a sense of closure and security they hadn't fully enjoyed before. "I never thought I'd be grateful to mail-order brides," Sarah Henderson remarked during a visit, as she and Tabitha sat shelling peas on the porch. "But if you hadn't answered Keith's advertisement, who knows what would have become of this place? Margaret might have gotten her hands on it after all." Tabitha smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. "I'm the grateful one. A year ago, I had nothing, no family, no home, no future. Now I have everything I could ever want." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the prairie in pristine white. The ranch house, snug and warm against the bitter cold, became a haven. On the night of the winter solstice, during the worst blizzard in years, Tabitha went into labor. With the doctor unable to reach them through the storm, Sarah Henderson and Keith helped deliver a healthy baby boy as the wind howled outside. They named him Thomas, after Tabitha's father. Keith's hands trembled as he held his son for the first time. "He's perfect," he whispered, awe evident in his voice, "just like his mother." Tabitha, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their child. "I think he has your chin." "Poor kid," Keith laughed, gently placing the baby in her arms. "Tabitha, there are no words for what you've given me." As Thomas grew, so did the ranch's prosperity. By his first birthday, the Calloway herd had doubled in size, and Keith had hired additional hands to manage the expanding operation. Tabitha's garden had evolved into a small orchard and vegetable farm that supplied not only their table, but also the North Platte General Store. On a warm spring day, as Thomas took his first uncertain steps across the porch, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. A distant cousin of Tabitha's had been trying to locate her for months. Her parents' debts had been settled through the discovery of investments her father had made years earlier. There was a small inheritance waiting for her. "What will you do with it?" Keith asked that evening as they watched the sunset, Thomas asleep in Tabitha's lap. She considered the question. "I thought perhaps we might set it aside for Thomas's education." Or, she hesitated, "we could use some of it to build that second bedroom we've been discussing." Keith's eyebrows rose. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Tabitha smiled. "Dr. Thompson confirmed it yesterday. Thomas will have a little brother or sister by winter." Keith's whoop of joy startled their son awake. but his tears quickly turned to giggles as his father scooped him up and danced him around the porch. Later, as they stood together watching the stars appear over the prairie, Keith wrapped his arms around Tabitha from behind, his hands gentle over her still flat stomach. "I never believed in fate," he murmured against her hair. "Thought a man made his own way in the world through hard work and determination. And now," Tabitha leaned back against his solid warmth, "now I think sometimes life sends us exactly what we need, even when we don't know we need it." He turned her in his arms. "You came to me when I was lost, Tabitha, when this place was just land and buildings, not a home. And you gave me a place to belong when I had nothing," she replied softly. "We saved each other." As the years passed, the Calloway Ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in Nebraska territory. They added a daughter, Rebecca, to their family, and later another son, James. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, but the heart of it remained the same: the love between a man and woman who had taken a chance on each other. On their 10th anniversary, Keith presented Tabitha with a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate pin made of gold, fashioned in the shape of a key. "What's this for?" she asked, admiring the craftsmanship. "10 years ago, you arrived with nothing but that carpet bag and more courage than anyone I've ever known." Keith fastened the pin to her dress. "You were seeking security, a place to belong. What you didn't know was that you were the key to everything I needed: a home, a family, a heart that was whole again." Tabitha touched the pin, tears welling in her eyes. "From mail-order bride to treasured wife, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "Not just treasured," Keith corrected, drawing her into his arms. "You are the treasure, Tabitha Calloway, the most valuable thing I'll ever possess." As the sun set over the prosperous ranch they'd built together, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her here from desperate poverty to abundant love. The gold pin glinted in the fading light, a symbol of a promise fulfilled and a future secured, not through wealth or possessions, but through the enduring bond of two hearts that had found in each other the greatest treasure of all.